Hi everybody. I know it's been a while since I've actually done a movie review. I actually have this one and another one. Well, the second one's not a movie review. It's me talking about a TV show that I'd like to see again. But this video here is going to be about a movie that I saw recently. Well, Tony and I'm sure I've mentioned this before. Tony and I have uh, HBO on our cable. So that means, guess what? We can actually watch movies, and it's not the pussified version or the wussy version or the chicken shit version of it, which is the watered down version. Because you know how well the other like the regular channels, like for example like A&E or History, or like ABC, NBC, CBS, those channels have to water it down to make it more like a PG-13 kind of stuff. Like if it's a normally rated as an R movie in the theater, they have to water it down to like PG-13 nature. Well, HBO recently, Tony and I were watching HBO. I DVR'd it so this way I could make Tony go to the store with me uh, one night recently. Well, what it is Tony and I watched X-Men: The First Class off of our DVR because I had to DVR it off of HBO. Well, what happened is we did end up watching it most of the way through. We ended up like sitting down and watching it like 5-10 minutes into the beginning of the movie. Well, here's basically a synopsis of the movie from with a little bit of help from good old Wikipedia here, and a Cliff Notes version, of the movie. And I don't say how the movie ends, so if you're hoping I will, I'll go ahead and ruin it for you. It's not happening. Well, the movie starts out in a World War II Nazi concentration camp with scientist Dr. Klaus Schmidt watching a young Eric Lensherr bend a metal gate with Eric's mind while Eric is separated from his mother. And Dr. Schmidt is played by none other than Kevin Bacon. Okay, well, Dr. Schmidt is played by, of course, Kevin Bacon. The young Eric Lensherr is played by Bill Milner. Dr. Schmidt tortures young Eric by killing Eric's mom in front of Eric. Meanwhile, back in New York, here in America, in New York State, a young Charles Xavier, played by Lawrence Belcher, meets a young Raven. That's the Blue Lady, played by Morgan Lilly. And Xavier is elated to meet somebody that has his gifts, same kind of gifts as Xavier does with his mind. And then now you fast forward 18 years later, and Eric is still chasing down Dr. Schmidt, and Xavier is graduating from Oxford University with a thesis on mutation. Human mutation, not cat and dog mutation. Eventually, Xavier and Eric meet up with McTaggart, a CIA operative, and McTaggart takes the two men to the CIA headquarters and meet up with the people from Division X, where Beast, that's his code name, works as a scientist. And I'm going to use like all the what the characters' actual names are, like Beast and Xavier, and because Professor Xavier, everybody knows them that way. I'm just going to use those names just so this way you're not all going, what? Like what's the real names? Well, after a while, Eric and Xavier start recruiting people for their projects, such as the characters known as Banshee, Havoc, and Darwin. Xavier and Eric try to recruit Wolverine, but Wolverine rebuffs them in, of course, an uncredited role for Hugh Jackman. And Wolverine tells Xavier and Eric to get lost in a very colorful manner. Let's just say he tells them to take a flying leap, more or less. Eventually, Eric catches up with Dr. Schmidt and Eric kills Schmidt, much against Xavier's wishes for Eric to do so. And I'm not going to say how Eric kills Dr. Schmidt, but it's other than to say it's pretty gross. I mean, he doesn't like bash his head in or anything like that. He doesn't even touch him. But let's just say Eric does something pretty nasty to him involving metal. Okay? And like I mentioned earlier on in this video, I'm not going to tell you how the rest of the movie ends, because I want you to see how it really ends, and as, Paul Harvey used to say, to get, the rest of the story. Well, and I kind of did notice, and Wikipedia pointed this out as I was reading the article on it, that this movie, X-Men First Class, has kind of a James Bond feel to it, and it was set mainly back in the 1960s. So, I mean, it was kind of, like a little hippified, like little hippies. One thing I did also want to point out with this is Oliver Platt was also in this movie for a little bit. Of course, I didn't mention him earlier. I was saving him for now. I looked at him and I thought, oh my gosh, he's put on some weight for this role. And I was happy to see him. And Platt, that played a CIA guy who gets the group from Division X going, and he's the one that's got the thing with his feet where he can hang upside down like a monkey. I didn't mention that part earlier. Platt has something happen to him later on in the movie that turns him into, Beast. He has, an accident. I won't say what happens. You'll have to watch the movie to find out. As I mentioned earlier, I really did like this movie. And this is why I liked the movie. The movie was fast-paced and it did not drag at all. Although, as I mentioned before, I started watching probably 5-10 minutes into the movie. Of course, the nice thing is, as I also mentioned, I watched the rest of the movie in its entirety, from the beginning later on from HBO after I DVR'd it later from the beginning. The whole James Bond feel on the movie actually made it more interesting, and it was a change, to see Professor Charles Xavier, up and walking around on his own without those leg posts or whatever, rather than having Professor Xavier riding around in a wheelchair, which Xavier does in the earlier movies and in all the cartoons. If you've watched the cartoons or the earlier movies with Patrick Stewart in them, and because he's a paraplegic. I always did kind of feel sorry for Xavier, because I knew at one point, Xavier could walk, because it's there's been comments and stuff made in the cartoons and stuff, because I did watch the cartoons several years ago, that once upon a time Charles Xavier could walk, and, his legs did work once upon a time, and it's just me personally, and I'm not saying this as a, a bash against paraplegics or anything, because I've known paraplegics, they're perfectly fine people. It's just, me personally, I can't imagine what that's like. And I think that's why I was kind of glad to see Charles Xavier up walking around. It's I just mentally can't imagine that. I mean, most people couldn't. I mean, it's just, I couldn't imagine that happening to me. And I'm grateful that it hasn't, and I hope, knock on wood, that it never does. Because, believe me, I would go stone crazy if that ever happened to me. But one good thing, and I do have to say this for Charles Xavier, and this is something I want to discuss here. Much to the character's credit, you never see him feeling sorry for himself. And, it's just because, he's a paraplegic, he's got this gift with his mind, he can, he's, he's like the Sookie Stackhouse character, which appropriately enough, and this is something I should point out, if you've seen X-Men 2 and X-Men 3, Anna Paquin's character, Rogue, I find it ironic that Anna Paquin played Rogue in the X-Men series, because if you know anything about it, guess what Anna Paquin's doing now? She's playing Sookie Stackhouse, a psychic, part Fae, telepath in True Blood. I find it totally ironic, and it's something I wanted to point out here with the X-Men series, because I just thought that was hysterical. That it's just, the irony behind that, But I mean, that's just something, to tie in. And something also, and I wanted to mention this with this movie, with Charles Xavier's character. He never feels sorry for himself because he's a paraplegic, in a wheelchair. And it's like the same thing like in Fried Green Tomatoes about the little boy, Buddy, that loses his arm because the train runs over it. And Iggy talks to him about Eva's three-legged dog. Um, it's like that. If you want to know, and speaking of Fried Green Tomatoes, I did do a movie review on it a while back. So if you want to hear me talk about my thoughts on Fried Green Tomatoes, go watch the video. I mean, it's on here on this channel. But yeah, I really did like this movie, and I'll tell you a couple of people who I'd really like to see in more movies. I'd like to see Patrick Stewart, of course, since he played Professor Xavier in more movies. I'd also like to see more of Hugh Jackman, because he was in this movie too. And even though it was an uncredited role, Hugh, because he only said 3 words, and I won't say what the 3 words were, just because, as I mentioned, he got to say the only curse word in the entire movie, which is the funny part. Because I mean, this is, it's just like more gruesome stuff than it is, cursing, and that's probably the reason why it had such a high rating. I think it was either a PG-13 or an R, just because of the violence. That happens. But another person I'd like to see make more movies is, of course, Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman. I'd also like to see Brandon Keaton in movies. Some more movies like Beetlejuice and stuff, but such is my life. But anyway, I'm going to pause here so we can, get this going, and then get the other video that I was talking about here at the beginning going, alright? So hang on and keep an eye out for that next one, alright? Thanks for watching this one.